Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Acts of the Apostles and Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd and 3rd John, Jude and Revelation. Tonight we're in Revelation chapter 12. First, let's back up and bring us up to where we're at now. Now, in Revelations 8 and 9, we talked about the trumpets, the 7 trumpets. 6 of the trumpets sounded. We came through that 7-year period called the Great Tribulation, right? Came to the end. We just finished studying chapters 10 and 11. We saw a mighty angel came down from heaven. He brought a little book to John, remember? And last time we talked about 2 witnesses. Now, that was one of the general visions, the third one called the vision of the mighty angel. Now tonight we start a new part, which is another general vision. God stops the action here because it's very crucial to know a lot of information about how we got to where we're at the end of the tribulation. He's going to give us another vision tonight that's going to cover chapters 12 and 13. In 12 we're talking about a woman and a beast, and in 13 next time we'll talk about 2 beasts. Okay, so I call this vision the woman and the beast. And that's the 4th of the general visions in the book of Revelation. Something interesting about chapters 11 and chapters 12. How many chapters are there in the book of Revelation? 22. Okay? 22 divided by 2 is how much? 11. The Revelation talks about a 7-year period. Remember, it's a 7-year period broke up into 3.5 years and 3.5 years. Strangely enough, last time in Revelation 11, we talked about that first 3.5 years. Remember the 2 witnesses and the building of the temple and the beast confronting them and killing them, and then at the middle point of the tribulation, they're resurrected. Remember all that? Okay. Now tonight, we're going to talk about the second half of the tribulation. Notice that right in the middle of the book, he divides it right down the middle. The first half of the tribulation and the second half of the tribulation. Okay. Yes.
Are they going to start building the temple before the tribulation, or do they start when the tribulation starts?
Okay, we went into that a little bit last time, but let's talk about it again. Okay? We really don't know. There's a lot of discussion and a lot of arguments for a lot of years in Jerusalem because they can't build the temple at a certain place. Okay? That place is called the Dome of the Rock. And if you ever see a picture of Jerusalem, you'll see a dome out in the middle of the city. Now that's a Muslim mosque called the Dome of the Rock. Most Jews feel that's where the Holy of Holies is. That's where the temple has to sit. That's what's blocked the building of the temple. Okay? About 2 years ago, they did some digging in and around Jerusalem, which they're doing all the time. And they found a wall of the temple called Solomon's Porch. Okay? And by finding that and verifying that was where that was, they realized that the temple isn't really over there at all. That it's actually sitting in another spot, and the Holy of Holies is out in an area that's under Jewish control. And actually, a year ago, they set a cornerstone, several tons that they set out in one of those areas, and it was in the midst of a huge controversy you may have seen on the news, because they ran a truck out there real quick, these zealots did, and dumped this 3-ton stone out in the middle of this area, saying this is a cornerstone of the temple. This is where the temple is, not over there at the Dome of the Rock. So, technically, it could be built at any time, okay? The problem is, from a national point of view, is that the Jews dominated the Middle East when they had the temple at Jerusalem. That domination ended when Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple. And the people living in the Middle East know that, and a lot of them fear that if the temple's rebuilt, they'll dominate again. And of course, you can see how that would affect the tensions in the Middle East. Okay? Now, the good side of the picture, and I've got a couple of videos in there that talk about it, called the coming temple and Messiah. Basically, they have built the temple. They have made all the things that are necessary. They just haven't been able to assemble it and build it. They've got all the utensils for temple worship. They've got the robes made. They've chosen the priests. They've trained the priests in what to do. All of this has been put together, and millions, probably billions of dollars have flowed into Jerusalem and Israel from all over the world from successful Jewish businessmen, because they know it's a blessing if they're able to help in the building of the temple. So the money is there. The will is there. Okay? The items, most of it has been made. And if you remember the story of the temple was a very unusual building because it was built without the sound of what? Does anybody remember? Without a hammer or a saw. In other words, it was built somewhere else. And it was just sitting put together like a jigsaw puzzle. So you see, that could be done pretty quickly if it's built that way again. In fact, most estimates are if they can ever get cleared to do it, they can have it up in a year. Okay? Last time we talked about there's two witnesses during the first half of the tribulation. And the only other time we saw two witnesses was when the temple was rebuilt, when Ezra and Nehemiah lived. Okay? So it may be that it's built during that first half of the tribulation, or it could be built before then. The scripture's not clear on that, so I can't make a solid answer on that. But in other words, if we started at the beginning of the 7 years, within a year it could be fully built and they could be doing sacrifices. That gives them 2.5 years to do sacrifices before the midpoint when the trouble starts. And of course, we'll get more into that in later chapters in Revelation. Okay? So tonight, really, this question doesn't have a lot to do with the lesson, but it is central to the lesson as we get into it. Let's get to Revelation 12, beginning at verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, in pain to be delivered. Now, real quick, this is something that's different from anything we've seen. We haven't really seen any women so far in the whole book of Revelation, have we? But this woman is there, and she's very important. So we need to know who this woman is, right? And so my opinion is going to be the final answer here, right? No. No. Some of our Bible scholars back here, their opinion will be the final answer, right? Where's the answer to the question, who's the woman? What were the answer? Thank you, Frank. It'll be here. We just got to look for it, but it will be here, and we'll show it to you, okay, before we're done. Let's go on to verse 3 now. There appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, to devour her child as soon as it was born. Okay, we see a beast, a great red dragon, right? A creature. How many heads? 7 heads. How many horns? 10 horns. How many crowns? 7 crowns. Unusual creature, isn't it? The book's going to show us what all these things mean, and we'll see it before we finish the class. Okay? What book in the Bible is very important for you to know about if you're going to understand Revelation? What other book of prophecy is the key to a lot of these answers? Daniel. Very good. Now this is the thing about Daniel. I want to teach you something that really thrilled me when I found it out. Counting the years according to the Old Testament, we've talked about this before. How many years from creation to the time of Jesus' coming? Who can remember? About 4,000 years. From Jesus' time to now is about how many years? 2,000. What's 4,000 plus 2,000? 6,000. Okay, Jesus is coming back to rule and reign at the end of that 7-year tribulation, right? For how long? 1,000 years, and then the earth is destroyed. Okay, that's the big picture, okay? 6,000 years plus 1,000 years is how many? 7,000 years. So from creation to the destruction of the earth seems to be 7,000 years. What is 7? I'm math. Now, this is a tough one. What's 7,000 divided by 2? 3,500 years. Isn't that interesting? Now, here's the neat thing about it. If you start at the creation and you come forward 3,500 years, that's what we're saying, right? That brings you to 500 BC. Guess when Daniel was given his vision? Right at the year 500 BC. Right at the end of the captivity. Isn't that neat? God did that right in the middle of time. He put Daniel in that vision. And now here on the end, in Jesus' day, He gives John his vision. So that's really a key to what we're doing. Okay. Now in Daniel chapter 7 is where we want to go then. Let's flip over there. Everybody go with me. And I want all of you to look at these verses because I want you to help me do some math here. In Daniel, Daniel's a neat book. How many chapters in Daniel? One of those Bible numbers. 12. 12 chapters. The first 6 chapters are about Daniel and his life. Chapter 6 is that story we all know so well. What story is that? Daniel and what? The lion's den. 7 down to the end of, once again, divided right in the middle. The last 6 chapters of Daniel are visions. All things God showed Daniel through those times. Chapter 7 is a major vision. Okay? In this vision, he's going to see a bunch of beasts. And those beasts relate to what we've seen tonight. Okay? Going down to, okay, in the year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Belshazzar was either the son or grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Well, remember Nebuchadnezzar. He's the one that took him into captivity. Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. We've seen that in Revelation already, haven't we? We talked about the 4 winds of heaven. And 4 great beasts come up out of the sea. Remember that part because we're going to see that again in the next chapter when they come up out of the sea. But this time there's 4 great beasts. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon its feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Let's talk about a lion. How many heads does a lion have? 1. Good. Okay. How many horns does a lion have? Don't have no horns, does it? Okay? Don't have no crowns. Crowns would be something totally different we'll talk about later. Second beast, verse 5. Behold another beast, the second like to a bear. It raised up itself on one side. It had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. They said, thus unto it, rise, devour much flesh. Beast number 2 is a bear. How many heads does a bear have? 1. How many horns does a bear have? Don't have any. Okay. Third beast. Verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast also had 4 heads. And dominion was given unto it. We got a leopard. How many heads does this leopard have? How many? 4. Does it have any horns? Leopards don't have horns. Okay, unless God gives them. Verse 7. After this I saw in the night vision, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. We're not sure what this beast is. It's a mean beast. Okay, it's got teeth that are iron, and it's a really mean beast. How many heads does it have? If it doesn't say, how many do we assume it will have? 1. How many horns does it have? 10. Okay? And that's the last of the beasts. Count with me. 1 plus 1 is, plus 4 is, plus 1 is 7 heads, 10 horns. You see what I'm saying? This is really, John is basically seeing the same creature we're seeing here. But he's seeing it from the other end. He's seeing it after it's come to pass. Daniel is seeing things that are now happening and will be future. John is seeing things, a lot of it's already happened, some's happening in his day, some's going to happen in the future. He sees it as one great beast. But it's a dragon. It's really a dragon. Who's the dragon? Who's the old dragon, really? We really know that too, don't we? Because it said he pulled down a third part of the stars from heaven. Do you think it's talking about stars like we see at night? It's talking about when it's not a star, what's it represent? It represents angels. He's pulled down a third of the angels from heaven in his rebellion. We're going to see that for sure in a little bit. Okay, so now we've got a bunch of heads and horns. We need to talk about the crowns. When you think about a crown, what does it represent? What do you think about when you think about a crown? What goes along with a crown? A royalty, a king, a kingdom, right? King or a kingdom. And that's really what it's talking about, 7 crowns. John will mention something very similar in Revelation 17:10. That's the key to our 7 crowns. Okay? Who has Revelation 17:10?
And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space.
Okay. 7 kings. Notice the math though. He says how many are fallen? 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come, right? So let's count up our kings. There are kingdoms that have lived in the world. Basically, we're talking about kingdoms that are going to affect a certain nation out there. Okay? These are kings that had empires that ruled over the earth for a while. But more importantly, they had kingdoms that ruled over Israel, that particular nation, at one point in history, those people. Okay? Now, in our Sunday school class in the mornings, we're studying now about the first kingdom that ruled over Israel. The 2nd book of the Bible talks about that whole story about Israel and another nation and how God brought them out of that nation. What's that first nation that ruled over the earth? Egypt. Old ancient Egypt. Okay. But Egypt didn't last long, did it? Remember the story of the Exodus? We have that beautiful movie over here you can watch. Horrible story. Within a span of a few months, the greatest empire in the world at that time, totally destroyed. But God raised up others that would come along later. 2 Kings 18:11 speaks of the next nation that would rise up and rule over, in this case, the 10 northern tribes of Israel. Who has that one?
2 Kings
18:11, yes, sir.
And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Halah, and in Tartar by the sea of Gaza, and in the city of the Medes.
Okay, so Assyria came and took away the 10 northern tribes. That was the next nation used by God to judge Israel, right? That's the next one. What's the third one? Okay, Daniel 2, verses 36 through 38. In this one, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And in that dream, he sees a big statue. You remember the statue that he saw? Okay? And then Daniel tells the dream and interprets the dream for him. And this is what he says about the head of gold. The first part of that statue, which compares to our first beast we read about tonight. Daniel 2, verses 36 through 38.
This is the dream, and we will tell its interpretation for the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold.
Thou art the head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. What's the kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar ruled over? Babylon. Good. We call it Babylonia. We call it a lot of different names. Babylon. Originally, what was the name of the kingdom?
Chaldea.
Way back even before that name. When Nimrod first ruled over it, what was the name of the kingdom? Where he built the tower. What was the name of the kingdom? It was the Tower of Babel. Babel would become Babylon. Okay? Daniel 8:20 20, and 21 is the next vision after this one that we just read in Daniel 7. It gives us the name of the two next kingdoms that will come. The one that would conquer Babylon, and then the one that would conquer that kingdom. Daniel 8, 20, and 21.
The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king.
Okay, so these two beasts are Medo-Persia. There were two kings. There was Cyrus and there was Darius. Remember, they kept swapping the throne back and forth. And one of those kings is the one that threw Daniel to the lions. Okay, so that's Medo-Persia. They would be replaced by Greece, and it said Greece would have a notable horn in its forehead, who was the first ruler of Greece. Who was that great first ruler of Greece that conquered the world? His name even had the great in it. Alexander the Great. And the kingdom would, about 33 years old, he had conquered the whole known world, the Middle East at that time. And he would die. And the kingdom would never be as great as it was under him. Now, the last kingdom, the great kingdom, is mentioned in Revelation 17 and 18. Our friend John tells us about that.
17 verse 8.
Yes, sir.
And the woman which thou sawest in that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
Okay, there's a city at the time of John that reigned over the kings of the earth. It was the empire, remember? Jim read there were 5 kings that had fallen. There's one king that was in John's day. What was that city that ruled over the kings of the earth in John's day? What was that empire? What was the city that destroyed Jerusalem in the time of Jesus? Who ruled that all through that period?
Rome.
Rome. Good. Rome is the 6th kingdom. So there's a 7 BC. Okay, now that's the 6th kingdom of Rome. Okay, now it mentions later that there's one not yet come. He still hadn't yet come, although he's being put in place now. And for lack of a better term, we're going to call him the beast, because we'll talk about him some more next time. That's the one that's not yet. That was not yet in John's day. Okay, so he's painting a very clear picture. Here's 5 kingdoms that ruled, that were fallen. One kingdom that ruled in John's day, and another kingdom to come at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many crowns? 7 crowns. You see the picture? The beast system is what we're talking about. Nations, Gentile nations ruling over the earth. When Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, it was a beautiful statue built. But when God showed it to his man Daniel, it was beast. Beasts that would each come and rip and tear and destroy the one before it. We call it the beast system today. We call it the rat race. We call it dog eat dog. We call it big fish, little fish, don't we? It's the beast system. It's that same system. One nation trying to conquer another. We just come out of 30 years of a Cold War with a major nation, didn't we? That same kind of system. We remember all the years, you that lived back in the 50s and 60s, can you remember the nuclear alerts and the times when we thought the bombs were going off, and when we'd have a level 3 alert or a level 4 alert, and everybody, the missiles were all aimed and ready, and we thought something terrible was going to happen, it never happened. That's the beast system. If you don't have love in your heart and you're not working for each other, the basic nature of man is to do what to his fellow man? Destroy. Steal, kill, and destroy. Who comes to do that? The devil does. See? So if we don't have God in our heart, that's the system. That's the system he's talking about here. And he describes it the best way he could. It's a dragon. It's a dragon. It's that old devil himself. Now, let's talk about the woman a little bit. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. Tell me, who's that child? Read that verse carefully and somebody tell me who that child is. Only one possible person that I know of in the history of the world that could be the man-child. Who was it? Jesus. That's right, that's Jesus. Now, if Jesus is the man-child, then who's the woman? That's the next question. We need to know who she is. And the book's going to tell us. Now, I can find 3 possible answers. Now, naturally, just thinking, who's the mother of Jesus? Mary. So it could be Mary. There's one religious system in the world today that's real big at making this verse Mary, by the way. But I don't think it's Mary. There's another possibility. What other woman do we talk about in the book of Revelation and in prophecy? The bride. Who's the bride? The church. Some people have felt, not as much now as they used to, that it was the church. Mainly because Israel had been scattered and they never thought there'd be another nation, Israel. And that brings me to the third possibility. What people brought forth Jesus? Israel. Okay, there's three possible answers to our question. I want to give you all the different answers and then show you what I feel the Scripture says. Now, once again, there's a Roman Catholic system out there that says Mary is who it's talking about, the Virgin Mary. I'm afraid if Mary was to come back and see what they've done to her, she'd be terribly upset. Because she's my sister and I love her in the Lord, but she was never meant to be worshipped or prayed to. That's only for God. And they have raised her to that place because they misinterpreted this verse, plus a lot of other stuff. Goddess worship, the old goddess worship. Jim, we talked about it earlier today. Witchcraft and all that. They need a person to worship. And it's either a man or a woman. In this case, they picked a woman. Okay? God's Trinity is the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, but the pagan Trinity is always the Father, the Son, and the Holy Mother. And that's a subtle change, but it's a very important change. We can't take a chance on that. So no, it's not Mary. She's a wonderful Christian sister, but it's not her. That leaves us with the church in Israel. A lot of good Bible scholars feel that promises made to Israel in the Old Bible are really promises for the church today, and sometimes that works, doesn't it? Because a lot of those promises do work for the church. But now, and that's just in the last 50 years, we've suddenly realized there can be a nation Israel again, doesn't it? And that those verses could apply to Israel, although there wasn't a nation. I remember seeing a Bible once that was done around 1900 by a man named Schofield. Brother Schofield puts a note in some of his Old Testament passages concerning Israel about the nation Israel coming and flourishing again. Now he does this around 1900. He says, I don't know how it's going to happen. But this nation will flourish again. It's going to come back and flourish. God's Word says so. You have to realize that at the point in time he wrote that, that's 50 years before there was going to be a nation of Israel. Israel hadn't been a nation in over 1,800 years. That took a lot of faith. It's not so hard for us to see today, is it? Because we've seen it come to pass, don't we? We've seen some marvelous prophecies fulfilled in our day. And one of those is bringing back of the nation Israel. So let's see what the Bible says about the woman. Go back up to verse 1 for a moment. I want you to notice how the woman is described. She's clothed with the sun and the moon and has a crown of 12 stars. Somebody read for me Genesis 37, verses 9 through 11. This is a story of our old friend Joseph. Remember Joseph the dreamer? Listen to one of his dreams. Who has Genesis 37, 9 through 11?
Okay. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars. And the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father to bless his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, What is this dream you have? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Okay,
notice what he just read. Joseph had a dream. In the dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bow, right? Jacob understands the dream, doesn't he? He discerns this dream correctly. What does he say the dream is? That me, the father, and the mother, and your 11 brothers are going to bow down to you. Is that what you're saying? And he said he noted it in his heart because he knew someday there's something was going to happen with Joseph. And sure enough, years later, what's going to happen in Pharaoh's court? When those boys, those 11 brothers, come down to get bread for their families, what do? They have to bow before Joseph. See? And we're seeing that same picture here. Okay, but this time we've got the sun, the moon, and 12 stars. Why is it 11 in Joseph's story and 12 here? How many boys did Jacob have? 12. But Joseph's one of them. So if he's counting just his brothers, how many does he count? 11. If we include Joseph, how many is there? 12. The sun, the moon, and 12 stars represents Jacob and his sons. Can we say that then pretty clearly from that verse in Genesis? So what does the woman represent? The nation of Israel. Once again, 50 years ago it wasn't a popular idea. 50 years ago there wasn't a nation of Israel. Today there is. Okay, let's go on from there. Also notice here in verse 5, the man-child, we've been talking about visions of Jesus. Our third vision of Jesus in the book of Revelation is the man-child here in 12 and 5. The woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared of God that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Have we read that number before, 1,260? When did we read it before? Last time, if you'll go back to chapter 11, you're going to see 1,260 days. Remember, we figured it down to months and years. How many years is 1,260 days? 3.5 years. Very good. So here he is now. Israel is hiding for 3.5 years. We had 3.5 years when they were building the temple in Jerusalem, right? They're not in Jerusalem now, are they? They're in hiding because of the Antichrist. In fact, verses in the Old Testament seem to point to the place where they may hide. Does anybody know the name of the city where Israel may hide during this time? You ever seen, anybody here seen The Last Crusade, the Indiana Jones movie? The last part of that movie is made with this city. It's built into the side of this stone cliff. It's called Petra. There's verses in the Old Testament about Petra and about Israel hiding there someday. Some people feel that's talking about this time of the tribulation. Verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more for them in heaven. The great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. I told you a while ago what the stars represented, didn't I? Remember that tail that drew the third of the stars? Okay, so now how many of the angels follow Satan? 1/3, according to that earlier verse. But here it's very clear. There's no doubt who is the mastermind behind all these Gentile nations and all the things going in the world today. If there's any doubt, when you get down to verse 9, it's cleared up. Who is the great dragon? He's the devil. He's Satan. He's that old serpent in the Garden of Eden. That's the guy that's causing all the trouble. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. They overcame him. Who's the overcomers in Revelation? We've seen that term before. We saw it back in chapters 2 and 3. Who's the overcomers? The Christians. Those that believe Jesus is the Christ. They overcame Satan. And notice it said by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. Jesus mentions in the Gospels that from Abel to Zacharias they killed prophets. Who was Abel? Adam's son. Boy, that's a long way back, ain't it? All the way back to Abel they killed his servants. And then that's all the Old Testament from Abel to Zacharias. And then who was the first one killed in the New Testament? Our old friend John. And beginning with him, that also includes him and goes all the way up to the saints in the tribulation. And we're going to talk about that more later when that mark of the beast is instituted, right? You can't buy or sell. They're going to cut off your head if you're living in that time, if you stand for the Lord. Hard time. But God's going to, in other words, God's going to call him to task over all that. And even though all these people have died all through years, thousands of years, who overcame? Did the devil overcome them? It says they overcame him. And many times Christians overcome when they give their life. I remember one special Christian brother I knew, an old man that lived for years. He loved the Lord dearly, lived in one of those cabins, you know, up in the Tennessee hills. And he had about a dozen kids. And he loved those kids, and he tried so hard to get them to the Lord. He never could get them to the Lord. You know what happened? That old friend of mine died. Guess what happened within a year? 12 souls come to the Lord. You hear me? He couldn't win them with his life. He won them with his death. He overcame. when he died. Not to mention that he got heaven to boot. Isn't that great? We overcome in death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. A lot of questions about just when did the devil come down to us. Could be the middle of the tribulation, which means he's got 3.5 years. Could be that he came down, like it says down here, when salvation and the power of Christ came. When did the power of Christ come? When did he overcome? About 2,000 years ago, right? At the cross he overcame, didn't he, when he resurrected? So Satan may have just 2,000 years. But remember, we're talking about a creature that's an eternal creature. 2,000 years ain't long for him. How long is 2,000 years to God? It's about how long? 2 days. It's 1,000 years is a day, right, Brother Baker? So 2,000 years ain't long. Now it could be we're talking about when God first cast him out of heaven, way back before the foundation of the earth. Now that's way back 6,000 years ago. But once again, how long is it in God's eye? 6 days. He ain't got long. Any way you look at it, when he's down here, he ain't got long. And he knows it. That's why he's working so hard. Verse 13, and when the dragon saw that he was cast down to earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Can we say that that could be definitely a fact of history? Has the dragon persecuted the mother, if the mother's Israel? Can we say that's a true fact of history? Can we say it's going to really be a fact of history when we get to the Great Tribulation? Even worse than we've ever seen before? If you don't believe it, you just have to go back to World War II. And you see how many millions killed during that time. That wasn't Hitler that really did that. That was one man. He was inspired of Satan to do that. I really believe that. So that's the kind of persecution they've done. Why does he persecute Israel? Now we understood it in the Old Testament, didn't we, Brother Baker? We talked about that this morning. Satan knew a man-child was coming. A man-child was coming that would bruise his head. Remember that in Genesis 3? And so all through the Old Testament, he's killing Jews, isn't he? Mainly killing Jew baby boys. Remember when Jesus came, he even tried that trick, didn't he? Killing Jewish babies. Because he's trying to kill Jesus. Why is he doing it now? Let me put it to you another way. Let's talk about the nature of hate. Let's say me and Larry, I just got a bone to pick with him. Something about Larry just doesn't suit me. I just can't stand it. Okay? But now Larry, what did it say about the man-child? Where's he at now? He's resurrected on heaven, isn't he? Satan can't get at him. Satan's cast down here. Jesus is up there. Now, if I can't get at Larry, and I really hate him, what's the next best thing for me to do? Is it not get at his family? I may not can get him, but maybe I can get Lori. Maybe I can do something with them kids. If I really hate him, well, I got to do something. Hate will consume you like that. And that's what's happening to the dragon. And see, Israel is Jesus' family, according to the flesh, isn't it? Isn't this his kinfolk, as we would call kinfolk? We understand here in Tennessee about family feuds. That's part of our history. If I'm a Hatfield and you're a Coy, I don't care if I never saw you before, Philip.
God calls Israel his firstborn, don't he?
Very good. Also, Israel is called the firstborn. In fact, that's why he killed the firstborn in Egypt, because Egypt had tried to kill his firstborn. That was in Sunday school this morning. But see, in other words, that's his family. And Satan wants to destroy Jesus' family. Verse 14. And the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. Okay. Unusual way of saying something, but let's look at it a minute. It's a time. How many is that? 1? Whatever it is. Okay? Times has to be at least how many? 2. Okay? And then how much else? A half a time. 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3.5 times. Now what's that really sound like? We've been talking about 3.5 a lot, but it's not 3.5 times. What is it? 3.5 years, right? So it could be 3.5 years. But let's look and see for sure. How does a time relate to a year? Okay, to figure that out, we need to go to Daniel 24 and 25. Daniel 4, verses 24 and 25. Daniel chapter 4 is the only book of the Bible that you could really call the gospel according to Nebuchadnezzar. If you'll read, that one chapter is Daniel wrote it down, but Nebuchadnezzar is the one speaking. And he talks about how he was lifted up and thought he was so great, and he had another dream from God. And it was a dream about a tree. And Daniel tells him what that dream means in Daniel 4, 24 and 25. Who has that? Okay.
This is the interpretation, O King, and this is the decree of the Most High, which is come upon our Lord the King, that they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall whip thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou knowest that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whosoever he will.
How many times would pass over? 7 times. Now here's the Jewish definition of a time. Okay? We've already seen it because we know it's 3.5 years, but let me just share something. A time for a Jew is the time from one Passover to the next Passover. That's how they count. Passover is their New Year's Day. Okay, like we count New Year's Day. Now how long is it from one Passover to the next Passover? That's one time to a Jew. How long would that be? 1 year. So see, a time is a year. So he was struck insane for 7 years. And then God brought him back, and he believed in God after that. Verse 15. And the serpent cast out his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Question. This is a couple of verses here. Once again, I don't know all of the Bible. I know that's going to shock some of you to death, but I don't know all the Bible. And what this is about the flood, I'm really not sure. The flood can be a physical flood, or it can represent nations of people. It can mean he just sends massive armies after her, and somehow the earth helps her. Once again, some people feel this is referring to the time they're hiding in Petra, and it's set up in such a way that people can't get into it. Okay, so it's talking about maybe the way the earth is shaped there, but I really don't know. I got to tell you, this is when I don't know, I don't know. And I don't know what these verses are talking about, but someday we'll know. When it happens, if not before Charlie, when it happens, we'll finally know what these verses are talking about. The dragon was wroth with the woman, went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. Okay, if it's the seed of the woman and the woman is Israel, what people are we talking about? Most likely Jews, but they also have the testimony of Jesus. So what kind of Jews are they? They're believing Jews. There's Christian Jews, or what today we call Messianic Jews. So God's got a big program going on. And Satan's got a big program going on. There's a great war. There's a great controversy going on all around us in the spirit world between God and the devil. We can't understand all the programs, but it's God's plan for the ages to bring us out of this world and bring us to Him someday. Okay? Now my question to you tonight, God's plan includes everybody. Where do you fit in? What has God given you to do? We talked about the commission that He gave the Apostle John. We talked about commissions that were given to Isaiah and to Daniel and the other prophets and figures in the Bible. But in the last chapter of Matthew is the most popular commission. What's it called? The Great Commission. Who's the Great Commission to? Who's the Great Commission for? All of us in this room that are Christians. So you're part of that commission. What's your part in God's plan? What are you going to do this next week to serve your Lord? Okay? Now don't worry, God's going to complete His plans if you don't do anything. But the thing is, Mary Bell, if you don't do it, He'll raise up somebody else to do it, and they'll get your blessing and they'll get your rewards. He will raise up somebody else. Remember the story of Esther? He said, now Mordecai told Esther, now you try to do this, but if you can't, God will find another way to do it. But Esther, you'll lose out. Okay? I don't want to lose out with God, Jim. I want to get everything He's got for me to get. I want to be part of His program. I want to be in the middle of this fight. What is your part in God's plan for the ages? That's a question I'm going to leave you with tonight. Are there any questions?
What's your speculation on the seventh lamb?
The beast in Rome? Okay.
Maybe the EEOC?
EEOC, oh, we'll get into that more next time. But EEOC, okay, that's the European Economic, what's that? Something Community. It's now called just the EC, the European Community. They were going to call it the USE at one time, United States of Europe, they threw that out. Now they call it the EC. Basically what we're talking about, if you're watching the news much, you hear the last few years about the New World Order. And basically the EC is a group, all the nations in Europe whose fall have now come together. And it's very similar to the old Roman Empire. Well, there was about 13 the last I counted. And it goes up and down. Okay? But now you're talking about the 10 horns, which we talked about some tonight. It goes into detail. Look at Daniel 7, 8, 9. It'll tell you a lot about those horns and things. Okay? But yes, there's something going into place right now, the last few years we've watched. Mostly since the end of the Cold War, isn't it? Since the early 80s. We watched especially under George Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev. And now more and more happening over in Europe. And Clinton now is trying to put together one between us and Canada. And what do they call that? The trade agreement that we've got going with Canada and Mexico? That they voted in? NAFTA. We've got NAFTA and they have the EC. And of course a lot of people are still trying to put the Soviet Union back together. So any one of those could be it. But it seems to be, once again, in Revelation, we read that the city that reigns over the kings of the earth is the center of this last great empire. We'll talk about that more later when we get to that chapter. But Rome is in Europe. And the Roman Empire is no more. But there's a false religious system that says it starts in Rome in this book. And there is a massive false religious system we know of now in Rome called the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? So it's saying, and the Roman Catholic Church is very involved with the New World Order. And John Paul II is already proclaimed himself the religious head of the New World Order. So yeah, all of these things are in place. They've never been like that before. But it's really something to think about. Anybody else got a question? I love you.